whole world is reeling under the COVID-19 pandemic. It almost seems humans are losing the battle against the SARS-CoV-2 virus. But there is hope that humans may finally win the battle against this tiny virus. It has taken a heavy toll on the economies and also on the health systems. On this episode of Life and Science with Pallava Bagla, we meet Dr. Soumya Swaminathan. When the COVID-19 pandemic ends, the leadership of Dr. Soumya Swaminathan would be recorded in golden letters. I'm at the hallowed institution called the MS Swaminathan Research Foundation in Chennai. And my guest today is Dr. Soumya Swaminathan, a global health expert and chief scientist at the World Health Organization, and also the daughter of Dr. MS Swaminathan, the man who gave India the Green Revolution, which is why this is such a lovely location to meet Dr. Soumya. Namaskar, Dr. Soumya. Thanks a lot for finding time with us from your very busy schedule. First, the big question, is humanity winning or the SARS-CoV-2 tiny virus winning the war against COVID-19 pandemic?
Namaskar Pallav, thank you for having me on the show, and also so lovely that we can meet like this in person, and we can even be unmasked because we're in the outdoors and we're maintaining a very safe distance.
Lovely.
So thanks so much. Well, I think humanity will win this war against the virus, though at the moment it may seem like we're a bit of up and down going on, and that's because the virus knows how to evolve itself to survive. And we need to stay one step ahead. But the one proviso here is it's a global pandemic and we need global collaboration and solidarity to win against the virus. So that's the only, I think, condition for us to win the war, but we can win it.
And being COVID appropriate.
Yes.
That is
absolutely.
also very critical. We are at the MS Swaminathan Research Foundation. What a beautiful place. Tell me a little bit about the foundation.
So my father, Dr. Swaminathan, set up the foundation in 1988 when he returned from being the Director General of the International Rice Research Institute. And he had just won the World Food Prize. So he put that prize money and all the other prize money that he had into setting up a foundation to basically take science and technology to people.
In your early life, did the towering personality of Dr. MS Swaminathan influence you? Because he's such a towering personality for India.
Absolutely. But while growing up, we didn't recognize or feel it that much because we grew up like any other children. We played with our neighbors. We played with children from, our neighborhood, all economic groups. We were more comfortable in Hindi than in English, though my mother made sure we learned Tamil.
You are a family of achievers, 3 daughters, each of them leaders in their different fields, and your mother was such a towering personality in her own right, father in your own right. Tell me a little bit about your sisters and your mother.
Yes, I think both my mother and father had very strong influences on us in their own way. My mother spent more time bringing us up because my father was very busy in those days. But he always made it a point to spend a few days with us every year when we would travel to different parts of the country. Quite often it was an ICAR institute, so we visited many of the ICAR institutes, including Veterinary Research Institute, the Dairy Development Institute, the institute in Mandabam that works on marine life in our childhood. We went to bird sanctuaries, wildlife parks. The three of us, were given freedom to decide what we wanted to follow. We were never told what we should do, and we were always treated, I suppose, just like boys would have been treated, given all the opportunities to explore the world and follow our passion. And so three of us took very different fields. I went into medicine, though I wanted to be a veterinarian in my early years, but I ended up doing medicine and was always passionate about research. The sister, I'm the eldest, and Madhura, the second sister, went into economics. She specialized in agricultural economics, and she's a professor at the Indian Statistical Institute. And my youngest sister, Nitya Rao, is an expert on gender and development. She did her PhD work with the tribals in Jharkhand. In fact, got cerebral malaria while she was doing her PhD, and is now a professor of gender and development at the University of Norwich in the United Kingdom. So I guess you could see the influence from our parents on the fields we took, but all three very different, and basically was based on our own interests and what we wanted to do.
And three daughters and three extraordinary persons which have come forth. Any message your life and your family's life has for young Indian daughters of today, because you are a role model?
My message to parents is, let daughters follow their dreams, just as you would let sons follow their dreams. Don't put them into boxes or restrict them. Girls can do anything that boys can do, absolutely anything. And we've seen so many Indian women who are now role models in different fields, from space science to being pilots and being pioneers. My daughter is a marine biologist, and she's specializing in coral reefs. So let your daughters follow their dreams. And for the girls, I would say, yes, follow your passion. Don't let anything stop you. And one can manage both home life, family life, and a career, and do justice to both.
Let us now shift focus and talk about the COVID-19 pandemic. Dr. Soumya, you have personally worked with two deadly pathogens, tuberculosis bacterium and the HIV virus. Is the SARS-CoV-2 virus more crafty than these?
I think they're very different. I wouldn't say that it's more crafty or less. I mean, Mycobacterium tuberculosis is a pathogen we still don't understand fully. We don't understand the immunology. So that way I would feel that this is simpler, because we have been able to understand enough to develop safe and effective vaccines. However, the SARS-CoV-2 virus continues to mutate and evolve, and again, this is not unexpected. The HIV virus mutates much more rapidly, in fact, so that's a problem. So in fact, in a way, it's good. The SARS-CoV-2 virus has a much slower rate of accumulating mutations than some of the other viruses that we know. So that way, I think we've been lucky, in a way, that this SARS-CoV-2 virus has properties that actually enable us to have developed these countermeasures.
But how has it been able to really humble the humanity across the world?
I think that's because it's a respiratory virus, and it has some advantages. It's able to transmit from person to person even when you're asymptomatic, unlike the original SARS virus, which only spread from someone who was very sick. So that is one property, and the fact, of course, that it's able to evolve, and in a large proportion of people who it infects, it remains silent. So I think there are things about it we don't understand. There are obviously properties of the human immune system which determine how you react, because each individual reacts very differently to this virus. So this is why drug development for COVID has improved after we understood the different phases of the disease and the pathogenesis. But there are still challenges. Long COVID, we still don't know which pathway actually causes long COVID, and therefore which are the drugs that are going to be effective in tackling it. So still more research needed.
Oh, plenty of research needed. First few months I was suffering from brain fog, and I didn't know what hit me. Right. There's so much happening. Fortunately, it's kind of waned, but it's a very strange feeling after having
Yes.
had this infection.
Must be frightening, to think that.
It wasn't frightening. I remember early when I was ill, I sent a message and you responded, you will live to tell a tale because you had a vaccine. That kind of gave me a lot of solace. So I wasn't frightened or worried. And the doctors treating me were doing a very good job, amazing job at the All India Institute of Medical Sciences. And normally, vaccines come later and drugs come earlier. In SARS-CoV-2, we've seen the reverse happening. The vaccines have come ahead of the drugs. There are so many different vaccines. Are you happy with the pace of development of the vaccines?
No, absolutely thrilled. I mean, I think it's been one of the greatest scientific accomplishments to develop so many vaccines within a matter of under a year. And I think the reasons for that are, firstly, that there'd been a lot of investment into these new platforms. The mRNA platform, people have been working on it for decades, and we never had a proof of principle. With the adenoviral vectored platforms, as well as some of the other, subunit protein platforms, new adjuvants which have been used this time around. So the investments in research over the last few decades paid off. The second thing is that there was a global view to developing vaccines. The WHO played a fairly central role in this, bringing people together very early. February 2020, we had the first Global Research and Innovation Forum, and huge investments, particularly by high-income countries, but also, of course, by middle-income countries as well. And that's why we have now, 250 odd candidates.
250 candidates?
Yes, of which over 100 are in clinical development.
Wow.
And several of them in India, so it's very encouraging.
India has developed 2 homegrown vaccines. Did you expect that to happen?
Well, I'm very happy it happened. I knew India had the potential,
Yes.
but we have not actually done this in the past. We've been able to make vaccines and drugs affordably using our innovations in processes. But I think this is the first time that we've actually got homegrown vaccines, and I think there will be maybe more than 2 if we look at a longer term. So this is extremely good, and I think it really gives a boost to our indigenous R&D and all the other things you need in the ecosystem to have an innovative R&D sector thriving. You need strong clinical research sites. You need strong ethics review and ethics oversight. You need a strong regulatory system, both at the stage of clinical research, but also then at the stage of approval of the new product. So all this has to go hand in hand. It's taken a big leap forward, and we should continue to strengthen it.
2 widely different vaccines. The Covaxin from Bharat Biotech is an inactivated virus vaccine, and the second one is the world's first DNA vaccine. Did the DNA vaccine, is it exciting development to have?
I think time will tell. It's certainly very exciting in terms of having this new platform, because just like the RNA vaccines, DNA vaccines can be quickly turned around to tackle new variants. They could be used for pathogens. I'm already thinking about TB, for example. But again, when it's the first of its kind, you have to look very carefully at the data, you have to have the safety follow-up, and you have to have the confidence in both the efficacy and the safety. So I'm very cautiously optimistic about this platform. It was the same for mRNA. They've now proven to be safe and efficacious. So we need to do the same with the new DNA vaccines. I think there are about 11 globally that we are tracking.
Yeah, but some of the mRNA vaccines are kind of failing to the Delta variant.
We don't know because I think the way in which the studies are being done are showing that the neutralizing antibody levels are declining over time, and for Delta variant we know that you need high levels to protect you. However, all of the studies so far show continued high levels of protection against severe disease.
Sure.
Like you described your case and many other people who got infected after vaccination. Many stayed at home, maybe some went to hospital like you did for a few days, but then you came out of it without really having become very, very sick. That's what we want the vaccine to do, protect people from getting very sick. And it seems to be doing its job.
What about the issue of inequity in giving vaccine? You have been very vocal about this from the WHO platform as the chief scientist. What is their view on inequity which we see?
I think this is where it's the downside of our experience. I said I was very excited about the scientific advancements and how scientists around the world work together to ensure that these tools get developed, whether it was diagnostics or vaccines or even drugs. But on the other hand, when it comes to access, we haven't seen the same kind of commitment from politicians, from companies. And unfortunately, we've seen the majority of doses so far going into high-income countries. You know, high-income countries today have administered more than 100 doses per 100 people. Low-income countries, on the other hand, have administered 2 or 3 doses per 100 people, you see. So you still have people dying at a rate of about 9 to 10,000 people a day. This need not have been the case if the available doses had been equitably distributed to protect the most vulnerable, you see. This is why we set up COVAX. But COVAX was undermined by many factors, including the fact that people who have the buying power and people who have the manufacturing capacity choose to use the doses differently. As far as India is concerned, I think, of course, a big advantage is that India is a huge manufacturing powerhouse. But then we have responsibility for supplying the world. COVAX depends on India for supplies, depends on the Serum Institute and BioE and other companies, Bharat Biotech. So while India ramps up its own vaccination program, absolutely essential, we also need to look at serving the needs of countries that, particularly in Africa and Latin America, that are right now in a very, very distressing situation.
Yeah, it was a tough call because India started vaccine Maitri and then the second wave came, so it was very tough. I can imagine if I were in the position of the government or in a government position, whether to give doses to Indians or to give it outside, it was a very tough call. Let's talk a little bit about the way India has handled the pandemic so far. Very early, India took on universal masking. In fact, a study came from the Principal Scientific Advisor's Office and the Prime Minister himself took it up very early. There were early lockdowns. Till end of last year, India seemed to have done pretty well. What is your assessment?
Yes, indeed. You know, all countries were learning. And the time at which India went into this full lockdown, we didn't really know a lot about the virus. So yes, I was so happy to see that India was one of the first countries to adopt the masking coming from the Prime Minister down. And then the first phase we were able to contain. Many countries went into this kind of strict lockdown. Of course, it had a huge impact on the poor, on livelihoods and so on, but it did manage to curtail the spread of the infection. It gave the health system time to prepare itself. But then, you know, pandemic fatigue set in, and also I think there was the belief that the virus had actually gone and it wasn't going to come back in a big way. And that's when I think the Delta variant struck early in 2021. And the Delta variant, along with the increased mixing of people, the mass gatherings and so on, led to an explosive growth of the virus, which we saw in this, in the second wave.
Yeah, the second wave was quite devastating for the country.
Yes.
And now it's actually the Delta variant is spreading across the world.
The Delta variant has a huge advantage. It's about 2.5 to 3 times more transmissible than the original virus. So one person can infect 6 to 8 people. The original virus, one person, infected person could infect 2 to 3 people. So you see how easily the Delta variant spreads, and that's why you see whole families getting infected, whole communities, clusters happening everywhere. This is a big challenge, and this is the reason why we need to prevent more deadly variants from emerging. And the more we allow this virus to continue to multiply and transmit, the more chances are that even more deadly variants could emerge.
So you fear more variants coming beyond Delta?
Yes, yes. We cannot predict when, where, how, and with what properties. But just looking back over the last several months, we should expect that some more variants could emerge. And the worst will be if a variant emerges which is resistant to the vaccines that we currently have. So far, we've been lucky. Even the Delta variant does respond to the vaccine-induced immunity. But we cannot be sure that that will be the case.
Now, many people say there will be a third wave in India. There is still 400 million people in India who are either unvaccinated or have not contracted the virus, depending on whether you trust the ICMR sero survey of a small sample or not. What is your view? Will there be more waves? Would it be geographically spread?
Yes, I believe that over the next several months, we may be seeing these ups and downs in different parts of the country. And as you rightly pointed out, it's the level of immunity in the population in that place. So there are parts of India still where they were not affected as much by the first and second wave. There's still low rates of vaccination. There are still susceptible populations. So wherever you have susceptible populations, the virus can spread. I think in the major metros, they were all covered by the second wave, so there should be high levels of immunity. But that still doesn't mean that there are not individuals in those cities who are not susceptible. So I think our main priorities should be ramp up vaccination coverage, perhaps do a data-driven approach, looking at those districts where there is low immunity, either natural or vaccine-induced, continue universal masking and other precautions for some time to come, and continue to test, monitor, surveillance, and the INSACOG should be looking very carefully at the whole genome sequences to make sure that no new variants are emerging. And this, of course, is being globally tracked as well through GISAID. But India also needs to be tracking this very closely.
Tracking is one stuff. Let's quickly backtrack very much towards the beginning. How much do we understand on the origin of the SARS-CoV-2 virus?
So this is a question that still needs to be answered. There are hypotheses on the table. As you know, WHO sent an expert committee in February 21. They spent a month in China. They worked with Chinese scientists. They looked at a lot of data and they came up with a voluminous report listing these different possibilities. These possibilities include that the coronaviruses, we know bats are full of coronaviruses. And previous coronaviruses have jumped from bats to humans. So either a direct jump from bat to human through an intermediate animal like the civet cats, in SARS-1, or the dromedary camels for the MERS coronavirus. We don't know what that intermediary animal is. Possibility of a lab leak is on the table as well. So there needs to be a lot more research, and WHO has recently put out a call to set up an advisory group to study the origins of viruses, starting with SARS virus, but in the future we should have a really top scientific global expert group that can advise on what studies need to be done, at what stage to go into the origins. These things take time, but they must be pursued, because for the future, for prevention of future pandemics, one needs to understand how these things happen.
You didn't mention, but there are conspiracy theories which say this was a bioweapon. As a chief scientist of the World Health Organization and as a leading Indian expert on infectious diseases, what is your view? Was it a bioweapon?
Well, there are plenty of conspiracy theories, unfortunately, in this pandemic. That's been one of the challenges we've had to face, and me, particularly as the head of the science division, have had to deal with misinformation and the infodemic. The conspiracy theories do not have any data to back them. But like I said, there are some hypotheses on the table. Scientists believe that the most likely one is that it jumped from bats, either directly or through an intermediate host. The lab leak theory cannot be ruled out because accidents happen anywhere. Accidents have happened in the past, they're going to happen in the future. So one of the lessons is, how do we strengthen biosafety in our labs? Research has to go on.
Yes.
We don't want to stop research, but we want to minimize the chance of accidents. So that's why we need to understand if that was a possibility and if it could have happened. But I don't think that there's any credibility around this theory that it was an artificially and purposefully created virus.
What are the lessons the world has learned from this COVID-19 pandemic, worst of its kind in the 21st century?
A few lessons for me actually, as I have observed over the last 18, 19 months what has happened. The first is that no country was prepared to deal with a pandemic. You know, there have been many preparedness reviews that have been done in the past with a view to telling countries whether they are prepared or not. Well, we saw that even the highest scoring countries performed poorly. And that's because the investments in public health were not adequate to meet the demands. It's not enough to have big tertiary hospitals to treat patients. We know that for a pandemic, you need surveillance, you need contact tracing, you need risk communication, all of that which happens at the ground level through public health experts. So for countries that have no or weak public health systems, this is the time to strengthen them. Second has been that science can deliver the solutions.
True. Absolutely.
You know, it's science that's going to bring us out of this and future pandemics. So invest in science, invest in R&D. Let's train our young people. And again, it has to be an interdisciplinary effort. Science today is interdisciplinary. Where citizens have had trust in government, those countries have done well. It's also because of transparent communication. Communication has been key. The WHO has really ramped up communication in the last.
I quite agree with you. WHO has done pretty well on communication this time.
And we've had to do that to respond to the pandemic. Many countries have done it, and that's been key. And empowering and engaging communities, taking them along. Without community participation and cooperation, you cannot fight a pandemic.
Can we avert future pandemics?
I would say that would be very difficult. We should do everything possible to avert future pandemics. And that's by understanding how these things happen and by minimizing the risks of these chance encounters between humans and animals. And so obviously by the globalization and deforestation that we're currently engaged in, we're actually increasing the chances of pandemics, not decreasing. So I think there will be a number of things that we can and we should be doing, which will be good for the environment and also good for other species that live on this earth with us, as well as good for the human species.
Thanks a lot for speaking to us, Dr. Soumya. Always a delight. There is so much to learn from your very gentle but persuasive personality, and India is blessed to have you as the chief scientist for the World Health Organization. And I'm sure the world would be a better place once the pandemic ends.
Thank you so much, Pallava, and
Thanks.
keep up your good work in science communication.
Thank you very much. The COVID-19 pandemic still continues to torment the world. But like Dr. Soumya Swaminathan, the chief scientist of the World Health Organization says, ultimately, humanity should be able to overcome it and move on. But there will be more pandemics and the world needs to be much better prepared. Like I've said many times, Corona harega, Desh jeetega. Keep watching India Science.